Hey, this is Liam Elliott recording live from NDC Sydney. Today I'll be doing an Ask Me Anything session with Ben Ilegbodu, who's a principal front-end engineer at Eventbrite. He is also a React guru, and today we'll be talking about his experiences in building his own React stack. G'day Ben, and thanks for joining us here today.
Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it.
Just to get started, I hear you had a bit of an effort to get here to Sydney today. You've come from not just the States, but from the other side of the world?
Yeah. So my family and I, we were having a vacation / I was speaking at a conference in Spain. So we traveled from Spain on Monday, arrived in San Francisco at 4 p.m. Family went home, and then I started my travel here to Australia at 8 p.m. Flight left from 8 p.m. to Vancouver, and then at midnight flew from Vancouver here.
Wow.
So yeah, in a matter of 2 days, I guess, I went from Spain to Australia.
Wow, that's
and completely lost Tuesday. Tuesday never happened.
So you're adjusted to the time zone now?
I guess so. I slept through the whole night last night, so that was good. So we'll see.
Well, we've just finished your talk downstairs on navigating the React Solar system, and
Yep.
It was a great talk, and
Thanks.
by all means you didn't look like you were jet lagged at all.
Great.
So let's get started. A bit of history about yourself, and tell us about how did you get into the world of React?
Right. So at the beginning of 2016, like end of 2015, we realized at Eventbrite that our front-end development stack was incapable of doing what we were trying to do, basically. We were wanting to create sophisticated user interfaces, but Backbone, and we had a marionette layer on top of it, just wasn't cutting it. So we started exploring the landscape of what we could use. There was Angular, there was Ember, and then there was React, basically. And I guess people just didn't like Angular, basically, I'll just put it that way. And then Ember just didn't really do it for us. And some people had already started using React at the company, so we kind of dipped our toe into that and started to make a case to the upper management, to the product management, to use React. And then we kind of never looked back since then.
Okay. And so it'd be great to hear the journey from going from sort of the MVC backbone world and into the world of React, which is, I guess, it's not so much a different mindset.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of twofold. So we went from MVC, which is model view controller type of way of development, to React, which is kind of one-way flow reactive, and then also from a world of having a framework to having a library. So the framework to library wasn't too bad. Like, I'm on the platform team, so we basically created our own stack to mirror all the things that you would need in a framework. But for the purposes of the way that you develop in React, that was a bigger undertaking. So in the beginning, we had to do tutorials and workshops to kind of teach people this is how you do React, because it's very different than how we used to do MVC. So the biggest difference, like the obvious one, is like an event happens, someone clicks a button and you want to update the UI. How do you do that? Yeah. In the old world, you would just go and touch the UI and say, okay, now I want you to be red. Mm-hmm. But instead with React, you have to update some state that will then make it red. So kind of just that mind shift is what was the most difficult, and what we had to kind of teach folks how to do. First I had to teach myself, and then teach everybody else.
Yeah. And so just a few, I guess, to clarify terminology there that's confused me a lot as I dip my toe into the world of React. You make the differentiation between a library and a framework.
Yeah.
Do you want to just dig a bit deeper in there and explain why there is such a big differentiation between the two?
Right. So, I mean, my understanding is that React just wanted to solve the problem of building user interfaces, right? And not have to dictate how you're going to make API requests or AJAX requests, or how you're going to handle routing. Because I guess what happens is that maybe if they did that, React would be really, really good at the UI, but then the way that they approached routing would be subpar. And then people would want to use something different, a different framework, just because the routing was bad. So they said, we're just going to solve this piece, and then let other people solve how to do routing, let other people solve how to do API requests, and let other people solve how to manage data. So the benefit of that is that it allows teams to create their own stacks. Like Eventbrite, we have a stack built upon React that's different than how Airbnb looks. It's different than how Pinterest looks and how other people have built their stacks. So it allows us to tailor our stacks based upon the experience of the people within the company and what they're used to. It allows us to decide, hey, this library is not working for us. We're going to switch something out and not have to worry about making any, having any problems. But the downside is that when you're getting started, like you're going to make the wrong decisions on parts of it.
Steep learning curve.
Yeah, and there's a steep learning curve. Like when we were creating the stack, we had to make decisions on all those things without enough information on how to do it. Like you've had to have had experience with it to know which one to pick. So yeah. It's kind of a chicken and egg problem.
Like we had that discussion yesterday, and I was telling you about that experience I had when we I was just putting together a throwaway application for a demonstration, and I needed to build a React application, and I started it up, and then I needed to work out how do I do my API fetching, how do I do my routing, where do I look to grab these different aspects, and it certainly it makes it a very steep learning curve for those that are new to that React ecosystem.
Yeah.
So, what was that experience like getting into that ecosystem and working out which tools do you need to do, and being, I guess, afraid of making the wrong decision so early on in the game and having to backtrack down the track and fix some of those mistakes?
Yeah, so as a platform architecture type person, I really enjoy it because that's kind of where my mind is. Like I don't do as much feature development anymore. It's about building out a platform, so that part's exciting to me. But then again, like the weight of the decision is also what scares me, because if we make the decision to use this type of router and then now it proliferates through Eventbrite, and then we realize a year later, like, oh, this one is no longer being used.
Well, that was my concern.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, that's just the nature of the business, I guess. And
in the world of React, do you find it relatively simple to be able to start saying, okay, we made that wrong choice in that router. Let's spend a sprint. Let's spend a bit of time changing that out and putting a newer version that's come out, or a newer implementation that's come out recently that does a lot of things that we need it to do.
Yeah.
Just being able to swap it out.
Well, so I mean, swapping out is difficult. Like to go back and fix all the existing uses of it. You could certainly build the next thing with the new one, but taking the time around, like basically it's a tech debt issue. And with tech debt issues, you just have to budget time to do it and whatever benefit that you would get from it. So it's not that it's necessarily difficult, it's just making the case that it's worthwhile to make the change. But for the most part, making those switches isn't hard, it's just the time-consuming nature of it.
One of the things I took away from your talk, though, was it's based on the solar system of React. So we've got the 8 different planets. But each planet that you mentioned, there's 3 or 4 or 5 different options.
Yeah.
And to me, that starts to multiply, and that starts to really do my head in. I come from an Angular background where it's a very simple, it's a framework that I can just ng new app, and I get an application, it's just built, it works.
Yeah.
I don't have to think about what other what choices I need to make. So how is it that you go about making those decisions? I know we've covered off making the right one or not, but to me that's a lot of work and a lot of effort needs to go into that research to make sure let's get the right one.
Yeah. So one way you can know how is you go to NDC Sydney, you go to my talk, and then you find out what I picked, and then you just pick those, and then there you have it. But really, it's just experience. You just have to do it. Like all the ones that I suggested came off of experiences, either positive experiences or negative experiences, and then you use it, and then you learn whether or not it makes sense to use it the next time. So it's still like pros and cons of having to build your own stack versus having the walled garden framework, like I call it, because I can also say, like with Angular, when they're making the different versions, people didn't like the observer pattern, or they didn't like observable pattern, or they didn't like one other aspect of it, and they would rather swap something out with something they felt more comfortable with. So you kind of have to take it or leave it, right? and people left it, and people just had to take it. So I think there's pros and cons of both situations, really.
Do you see that ecosystem just growing, or that solar system, so to speak, just growing and growing to a large, insurmountable amount of options?
So in the talk, I mentioned like the dominant ones or the prominent ones, but with every one, there's still like 50 other like smaller cases. So I think that's the benefit, is that someone can come in and create a library that's not Redux, that's not MobX, but solves the way that they want to do data for their application, and then they solved their problem specifically. So that's kind of the benefit of it, is that that people can solve stuff the way that they want to. The negative, obviously, is that you have so much choice. So, yeah.
You just mentioned then Redux, MobX, and I think for a lot of people, when they hear React, they think about state management, they think about Redux pattern, and think that they go one and the same. Like they come together. You can't have one without the other.
Right.
What are your thoughts about just blanket, let's just add Redux into our application to solve all the problems around?
Right. Yeah. So I say, if you don't have experience with Redux, like creating an app with React and Redux just does you a disservice, because React in itself is a new pattern, most likely for you. So adding in Redux, which is another new pattern, will just ensure that you're going to build something incorrectly, or that it's going to be more difficult than it has to be. So it's kind of one of those things where you should use Redux when you need to use Redux, and you will know when you need to use Redux when you keep bumping into this kind of data management problems. So typically when you see React apps, they're going to have Redux, because big apps are going to need that kind of data constraint. And if you're jumping into a React app, most likely it's going to have Redux for that same reason. But when you're starting out, I think it's not a good idea to have Redux. Just learn React, learn how to manage state within React, and you can do a lot with just React itself. And I found that doing React, the proper way, actually helped me understand what Redux is doing, how it works, the problems that it was solving, and then it made it easier to understand it. When I was trying to learn the Flux pattern or Redux, before I really knew React, I was just not understanding why I had to do all of this indirection. Like, it just didn't make sense, really.
And do you have experience then in going into projects that may have gone down that path of, let's throw Redux in there to solve a problem we don't have?
Yeah.
Taking that step back and looking at it and going, is it time do we actually have to take it out? Is it causing more problems than it's actually solving? Yeah,
I mean, I've seen that in code, and just like what it manifests in is just like improper use of Redux, and then it's like poor performing, or just not making the call, not setting up your actions correctly. So usually I just try to educate, and it's like, well, I mean, likely you're gonna need Redux as this thing gets bigger, so I don't want to tell you to remove it, because then you might have to add it again. So let's just try to figure out, okay, how can we massage this into the right way when it's already there? But when somebody asks me, do I need Redux in here? I'm like, no, let's not do it. But the only caveat, and I mentioned this in my talk, is that a lot of the applications at Eventbrite need forms. There's some sort of user input that we're taking in. So either you're picking your tickets, or you're logging into something, or you're updating your data for something. Like, it's most of the stuff for forms. And the only form system that we had before, form library, was Redux form. So it's Redux form, so it needed Redux. So a lot of times. And
that meant you had to add Redux throughout the entire application, or just into that little aspect that needed the forms?
Well, it made most sense to just add it into the entire application, because then you don't want this situation where part of your state is in React and some of it is not in Redux. Then it just becomes kind of schizophrenic in that sense. So you start adding it to the whole thing.
Yeah.
So we have at Eventbrite like a generator, kind of similar to Create React App, but not that generates apps. And the first question is asked you, like, do you need Redux or not? Are you trying to create a form or not? And then it makes the decisions on what libraries to add in there.
And I guess, so the flip side of the question would be then adding the Redux, adding Redux into an existing application.
Yeah.
that's been out running for a while, and someone turns around and says, okay, we do need Redux in place. We've got a few problems here.
Yeah.
What's that experience like? Is it just plug it in and off we go, or is it?
Yeah, it's unfortunately not. Unless you were forward thinking and like, you know what, I'm probably gonna need Redux, so let me write this in a way that's kind of more Redux-y like. Because you can write your React state and manage it and update it in a way that's similar to Redux, because Redux has this actions and reducers pattern, which is different than how you would write it if you were just doing React. So now when I write React, even if I'm not using Redux, I still kind of have the concept of actions and reducers inside of my React, and kind of will separate out my state updates into kind of a similar type of pattern. But if you didn't do it that way, then switching into Redux takes some work to kind of massage the data and change the way that you're updating it. So it's not exactly, a simple transition, unfortunately.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So as I mentioned earlier, I come from the world of Angular. In Angular, I'm a .NET developer. I work in Angular. I get TypeScript out of the box. Works beautifully with C#. I make the transition from C# to TypeScript really easily.
Yeah.
React natively is vanilla JS. Have you had any experience of TypeScript within the world of React, and what's that like?
Yeah, so I personally haven't had experience with TypeScript and React. The next React application I build, I want to use TypeScript because I've reviewed and seen lots of React and TypeScript applications, and I just really like the symmetry and the type checking that you get. So React has prop types, which is a way of kind of validating that the correct props are being passed and such, but it's still like a hint. It's not like a enforced thing. So really having that in React will be really useful. And even I develop inside of VS Code, which is the best editor ever.
I think it's becoming industry standard.
Yeah, I know. It's like I am the hugest evangelist for it, and I have no ties to it, but it's great. I still get hints on things like, oh, this function is supposed to take 3 parameters and I'm only passing 2, or I even get that even though I have no TypeScript set up in my editor. So it's like,
does that eliminate the need to go to TypeScript then?
No, because there's totally more cases that I could have been caught if I was using TypeScript or not. Or I refactor this component and remove a prop and don't update the call to it and things like that. So it would still be super helpful, I believe. But haven't used it yet for React. I've used it with normal libraries, kind of like utility libraries and stuff, and already seen the benefit there. So I had to use Flow with React in the past, and just didn't have the best experience with it. I tried it 3 times, so I gave it 3 chances, but each time I just found myself just hitting a wall where it's like I'd already written the code, I knew the code worked, but Flow was complaining about one thing or the other. So I was developing Flow instead of actually building my app, which seemed to not be the purpose of the exercise.
So in your talk too, at the very beginning, you start to mention to people, if you're getting into the React, just start with a very simple React application. Don't bother about the APIs, don't worry about state management, don't worry about routers. My experience though is that's quite hard to come up with that, a real world situation where that's all you need and you can learn enough. Do you have any advice for those that are starting out in React to where exactly to start, just to get their head around working in React?
Yeah, so I mean, what I was trying to convey is that you really just want to know the principles about how React works and just really focus on that. So for instance, the fact that when you update your state, it's asynchronous. So the ramifications of that, you want to know those before you start having to also learn a separate library as well. So I really just wanted people to focus on React. So the React docs have a tutorial. You build a game, and they go through all the core concepts of React. So how to render things, how to conditionally render markup, how to update your state, how to update state that depends on the previous state and how that can differ, just the different aspects of state, the different lifecycle methods and what they mean. So once you understand that part, then, okay, let's talk about how I'm gonna actually make this app look nice and add some styling. Okay, yeah, I need to actually get data from an API source. Let's figure that out. Because in the beginning, you could just use mock data and just really just learn how to use React. Because if you're trying to learn, it's just hard to learn too many different things at one time. So I just say kind of take a progressive step at it. So the whole purpose of the talk, well, there are many purposes of the talk, but one of the goals was just like, this is the order in which I suggest that you learn things.
Sure.
So learn React, learn ES next, because they really go next to each other. Use Create React App to actually build that app so you don't have to worry about the tooling in your head. Figure out styling, figure out routing, figure out APIs, and move on from there.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I guess one of the other things when it comes to, or one of the things that React really brought to the table was server-side rendering.
Yes.
And your SEO side of things back before the Google PageRank index ran the JavaScript, you needed obviously to render your HTML on the server. Me, I guess being ignorant to the world of React, I just assumed it was something that was pretty much just out of the box. But is that, it's something we need to opt into, we need to get other tools to generate these pages for us and get this up and running? Yeah,
so there is basically a function inside of React which will, instead of rendering your component to the DOM, will render it out to a string, and then you can put that into the response of your page, right? So that is what's in React, and that's the only part that they provide for you. But the whole process of fetching the data that you need in order to render that component on the server side, handling the route that came in to know what you actually needed to render and what you needed to get the data for, how to put the necessary CSS for that component that was rendered. All those other things are things that you have to figure out yourself. So you can figure it out yourself, or you can use a library to do it. So a library like Next.js solves that for you. So it does come out the box, and what React provides is like the thing that makes it all possible. Because before, we were using, at Eventbrite, we were using Backbone, and that uses handlebars templates to render its UI. So our backend was in Python, so we created this thing, or used this library called PyBars, which would convert handlebars templates into Python and render them on the server. So it makes it just a whole lot easier to solve that problem. But there's still like things you got to do before you render the React component, things you got to do after that those libraries help make easier.
Sure. Yeah. And then I guess that solves the problem, as you said, with your social media side of things too, the previews that you get in your social media applications.
Yeah, social media optimization, SMO. It's the new acronym that I found the other day. So yeah, that's the one thing that a lot of people kind of overlook, because like you said, Google renders, or Google can execute the JavaScript. So really whatever is rendered on your site, whether it's server-side rendered or client-side rendered, Google can figure it out. But Slack, Twitter, Instagram, whatever it is, they need stuff inside of the markup to understand what they want in the previews. Yeah.
And what about React Native then? So where does React Native fit into that ecosystem of the rest of the framework that we've managed to build up?
Yeah. So really, it's kind of a separate framework, really. Things like Redux or the data aspects, GraphQL for the API optimization, those still work in React Native. But the styling solutions, the form solutions, those are really specific to the web side of things. And
knowing that you might need a React Native app early in the game, does that affect that original stack that you're putting together for your website?
Yeah, it may be, because there are some libraries that do work with React Native, or will have a plugin that will work with React Native. or there's something that just assume that it's going to work in the browser, so it won't move over. So with React Native, it's very easy to share utility functions or utility libraries within your app. The sharing of components is really the tricky part, and it's the part that hasn't really been solved yet, because we really need an abstraction over the primitives. So in the web, you use a div, you use a span. In React Native, you use a view component, you use a text component. So you really need abstractions around that so that all the components you build can use the primitives instead of using specifically div and span, so that you can have more sharing going on. But that's kind of like the holy grail, I guess, to be able to,
write once and run it.
Yeah, I mean, even writing once for iOS and Android is already like mind-blowing, but being able to write it for the web as well as native would be awesome.
That's interesting, because I'm of that opinion that I think they're they solve two different problems. So I don't know if you're still going to ever get to that holy grail, because what I want to achieve on the web, I don't necessarily want to achieve the same thing on my phone.
Yeah, so that's the question. It's like, technically you could do it, but do you actually want to do it? Because a lot of the interactions are different, expectations are different, so not quite sure. But if you're in a situation where you're people strapped and you need to make an app, you need to make a website, having something that is there but not the best is maybe better than not having anything at all. So if you have no one who can do Swift, but who can do React, at least they can build something. And one would argue that a lot of the interactions for React Native should be the same interactions for mobile web. So it kind of impacts it that way, levels up your mobile web experience.
Definitely. And do you see anything else coming on the solar system, so to speak, of the React world? Is there, what's in the pipeline that those of us don't know about?
So like a new planet?
Yeah, are they discovering new planets, or are they a new asteroid belt that's just going to confuse the whole system for someone like myself?
A lot of what they're doing in React is just like improving React. So adding new functionality, things that were libraries or smaller libraries, not really big enough to be planets, but maybe meteors or something, from keeping the analogy, they're adding into React. So for instance, there was the ability to have components that were rendered in the component tree, but are added in the component tree, but rendered somewhere completely different in the UI. So you wanted to display a modal, launch a modal within some part of the left nav, but obviously you want the modal to show on top of everything. So you needed to be injected into the DOM. So that was something that got added into React. It was a separate library, but then added in there. They added performance monitoring recently. So they're doing a lot of things around just making React a better UI library. So a lot of the things around the UI they're adding. But something that maybe could be a new planet is Reason ML is like another programming language. And it's actually a typed programming language. So instead of having to do React with Typescript or React with Flow, you just write your React code in Reason, and it has a whole lot of benefits around its type system. So that is something that could come down and be the new thing.
And then redo the whole stack again.
And then you got to write it in Reason. Yep.
Thanks for your time today, Ben.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
And
it's been great.
This is Liam Elliott signing off for NDC Sydney.